All right, so for those who saw my talk just last week on Amplitude, some of this will be a little bit familiar, but this time I'm going to talk about the gameplay of games in this series. So, before Harmonix made Guitar Hero and Rock Band, their two most famous game series, they made these two quirky little music games called Frequency and Amplitude. They were released in 2001 and 2003, respectively, so pretty old by this point. And yeah, they were Harmonix's first commercially released console video games. They're pretty quirky and weird, but they set the foundation for how all their other games would more or less go with Guitar Hero and Rock Band. So before I actually get into the point of talking about the power-ups and the importance of the way that the power-ups work in these games and how it affects the game, I have to describe generally how the core gameplay of the games work at all. So Frequency, basically imagine Rock Band, for those of you who've played Rock Band, but every song has 8 instruments, and one player, this is not a multiplayer game, at least for the main game mode, one player plays all 8 instruments throughout the course of the song. So the song is broken up into its component parts like this, so, you know, refrains, choruses, hooks, all that sort of stuff. All of these little gated sections where the individual tracks, like you would play in Guitar Hero, are here, but there's 8 of them repeated for each instrument, forming this big sort of octagon shape. You only play one instrument at a time, so right now the section highlighted in green here, which is guitar, is activated. And in order to change instruments, because you are in control of which instrument you're playing at any time, you press the left and right directions to rotate the entire octagon around you, so whatever you're playing is on the bottom. Let's see what else is important here. Oh, right. So you're playing a section of things. So in case like this case, like Guitar Hero, you would be hitting all the notes of this guitar part. But you only do it for 2 measures, and then this instrument is cleared. It disappears entirely. You get scored based off of how many notes you hit, and yeah, it's gone. So you have to jump over and play something else. Also important to note is there is a streak multiplier here. So if you complete one section, it's just at ×1. Complete the next section without messing anything up, all your scores are doubled, then tripled, then quadrupled. For Frequency, it only goes up to a ×4 score multiplier. All right, so last bit of thing is the gates again. So things get cleared up and they disappear up until the next gate where everything resets, with a weird caveat of if it's a section that's already been repeated, like you're on the second time the hook comes around, or the refrain or whatever, if any instrument you've already beaten the first time is not there the second time. To compensate for this, they added a thing where, like, if you've defeated all of the instruments for that section, it adds 2 new tracks where 2 other ones used to be that are like freestyle modes, basically, where you can just mess around and like scratch a record or just like play this weird synth melody for bonus points. On to, wrong side, sorry, Amplitude. Amplitude more or less kept the same pattern, but with a couple changes. They got rid of the octagon and instead splayed it all out as one giant 8-lane highway, which gets a little bit weird for if you ever have to jump from track 1 to track 8 very suddenly, or the other way around. At least the new Amplitude kind of fixed that and just made it a single button press to jump between the two. But yeah, so they got rid of the octagon, splayed it all out as just 8 lanes in a row, and they bumped up the streak multiplier to ×8. And instead of having the gated sections, there are sort of like a couple gates here and there that just restore your health, if I remember correctly. But they aren't nearly as much as the other one you saw, right? Instead, what they did is just made it so after you clear a section, after a certain number of measures, I think it's 8. Now, actually, for this one, it would have been 10, I think, because they needed to give you time to go back to the other side. So after like 10 measures, they come back again. And so you just keep on a loop going through and clearing tracks one by one, waiting for them to come back, clearing them again. Yes, and because of the way that they come back, they no longer have the freestyle bonus tracks anymore. So, oops, wrong way again. Okay. Yeah. Have to quickly mention, in 2016, Amplitude was rebooted, which, if you saw my last talk, you heard a lot more about this. For the purposes of gameplay, everything I just described about how Amplitude works is exactly the same here. But I will get into a couple differences when I talk about power-ups. So, power-ups. Now that we've covered that, how do power-ups work in these games? Well, in general, they all have a structure where there's sections that are pre-marked, and instead of the normal like gems you hit to do the beats, they'll have a custom shape that represents what the power-up is. If you hit all of those in a section without making any mistakes, you get the power-up added to your little inventory here. Your inventory can only store one power-up at a time. So if you get a new one when you already had one, it kicks out the old one and you lose it forever. So you're kind of encouraged to quickly use up a power-up before you're about to get a second one. And yeah, you have the power-up. To deploy it, you can just press the X button at any time. I should note that because everything in this game is based off of music, you'll want to generally use power-ups in relation to where you are in a measure. So actually, I'll give it a good example later, so I won't cover that now. But yeah, the original game Frequency just had two power-up types. There's the one that you see here, which is multiply. It basically is X is the score multiplier. So whatever your streak multiplier currently is, actually I don't even see it on the screen here. Whatever your streak multiplier currently is, it doubles that. So you can go up to times 4 on your streak, but then up to times 8 with a multiplier. Power-up activated. The other one is clearing power-up, which basically automatically clears a track for you as though you had played it. But because of the interesting property I had said of that you can cheat where you use it in the course of a measure, you can actually use it as an undo button. So say I messed up the second note of this little section here, I could use the clear power-up I had, if I had one, to just say, that actually didn't happen, I cleared this section, fine. And because this section hasn't been scored yet, because you're not at the end of that measure yet, it counts as a cleared measure, and so your mistake didn't happen. The second game, Amplitude, added a few more power-ups, most notably a time slow power-up, which works better than you think it would and is actually really nice. And to cover for the fact that they lost the freestyle bonus tracks, they added a power-up, which just basically triggers it. It automatically more or less clears all of the tracks on the screen, and you just fly around playing weird music for a while, and it's fun, and you get bonus points for it. It also has the property of being a functional undo button. There are, as you can see from this list here is the ones from the 2016 reboot with their updated names. You can see there's a couple other ones here that are for the multiplayer modes. I think all of the versions of Frequency had a couple extra power-ups for multiplayer only, but I'm not going to get into those. So, the power-ups in Frequency are always randomly placed. Every time you load up or play a level, the locations of the power-up sections are completely random. And what this means is that you can't predict anything, right? You can kind of see, that they're going to be coming up ahead, right? But only from what you can see in the distance. At the start of the song, you won't know where a power-up's going to be, halfway through the song, right? So this ends up making the game very kind of improvisational and has all these interesting risk-reward situations where, you can memorize a general good path through the song, and generally speaking, it's usually advised to start on one side, hit all the notes, clear it, immediately hop over, just a simple hop to the next instrument, clear it, hop over to the next one, clear it, and just go in order, keep going around the octagon. But you might see this power-up, 2 skips ahead. So now you have this interesting decision of, do you just go for the easy path that you can reliably hit and do well on, or do you try to do a more difficult double jump over to try to catch that power-up in time? And have on the plus side, get the reward of getting a power-up, but for the risk of, missing a note and losing your streak, which, means your score will be a lot less than just a little bit if you hadn't made a mistake. With Amplitude, both versions, the power-ups are not randomly placed. They kind of are a little bit random. How it works in the original Amplitude is the power-ups, they made several configurations for each level, for each difficulty level of those levels, of where the power-ups could be. And when you load up the level, it randomly selects one of those layouts, basically. And yeah, so you can ultimately, over time, learn all the different layouts, be quickly oh, there's a power-up here, that means I'm in, layout C, so that means there's going to be a power-up, several measures ahead down here. And you can start to memorize stuff. But even worse, and I don't know if this is a bug or a deliberate feature, but if you paused any level in the middle of playing it, say you made a mistake and you lost your streak or multiplier or whatever, you could pause the game, just say restart level, and you'd be thrown back to the beginning of the song, but with the exact same level layout. So through doing that, you can keep kind of cheesing the level and grinding through, memorizing exactly where all of the power-ups are in that level and just playing it over and over again until you get it perfect. New Amplitude made it even more streamlined, and they just had, for every level, for every difficulty level of that level, there's just one layout for power-ups. Power-ups are always in the same place every time, and you can just memorize where they are. So, this ultimately leads to some very strange player behavior on the high end. So I should mention, for probably a lot of players playing these games, they're going to be playing them more casually, and the 3 will not seem any different. But for people who really dive into the games and play them at more serious level, like here you can see the world record score for one of the hardest songs, actually probably the hardest song of the game, of the original Amplitude, and also pretty much the second Amplitude as well, because they brought it back. Here, this player has noted like he's intentionally missing stuff just because he knows that by doing nothing for like 10 measures straight, or deliberately making mistakes and not getting anything counting for 10 measures straight, the power-ups he needs will line up in the end. I guess I forgot to mention this for Amplitude, but because they have the score doubling power-up and the power-up where you just like freestyle for a while, they have a very potent combination when used together. So basically what you can do is you can get the multiplier power-up, just keep it in your inventory, and then as you're doing one of the sections that would earn you a freestyle power-up, you activate the multiplier power-up right on the last note before you get the power-up. Now your score is being multiplied, you immediately activate the freestyle power-up that you get like one beat later, and then now you are just not even playing the game, you're just freestyling around making weird noises and getting a times 16 score on it. So you get crazy amount of points for basically doing nothing. So this player and several other of the like people who have all the world record score videos actually built programs to map out the most optimal route throughout all of the levels in the game. And to be fair, they still have to be very, very good in order to actually perform the route that the AI tells them is the best way to go through the level. So they are still incredibly skilled, don't get me wrong, but they map out the optimal route and then do it, and it's basically just chaining combos of multipliers together to get this optimally maximal score at the cost of doing nothing for like 10 measures straight or making deliberate mistakes, which seems kind of weird and counterproductive and not really musical, right? So, my final analysis about this is frequencies power-ups, and also their more forgiving, smaller combo streak, makes the gameplay more improvisational. Since you can't predict where power-ups will be, you must react to them. It has the whole risk-reward scenario I mentioned, where optimal memorized paths can't be made, so you just go with what you think might work, or try to it's basically an interesting decision all the time, and anytime a power-up comes up of which route should you take. So frequency is a very improvisational game. Amplitude's power-up placement and the higher combo streak means that levels can be memorized and ultimately mastered. It's a game that pushes you to try to memorize and master these levels, and they're generally even more punishing than mistakes, which again pushes you even more towards mastery. So Amplitude ultimately becomes philosophically this game of mastery versus this game of musical improvisation. And unfortunately, I think in my opinion, the Amplitude style of power-ups is what they continued on with for Guitar Hero and Rock Band, of, you can always predict where the power-ups are. And I personally find that a little bit sad, as much as I am a harmonics fanboy. I really liked the kind of more surprise freedom of the improvisational feel of the first game. So that's all I was going to talk about. Any questions or anything? Oh, sorry, yes. The question was if there's any difference between the PS3 and PS4 version of Amplitude, which the only version that was the 2016 reboot. No, not between the PS3 and PS4 versions. I mean, yes, there are some slight graphical differences because the PS4 version can, render things at higher quality textures and stuff, but not gameplay-wise. There's no difference between those two versions. The one thing I will say that is different between those two versions is if you were a backer on Kickstarter, you had a link to a special version of the game that had one extra bonus song. Oh, the price was, the question was, what is the price? And I actually don't know right now. But also the question was, where can you get it? And it's on the PlayStation stores. It's download only.